There's the last wing to be completed. There's the start of it. If you look real closely, well, not closely, I'm going to bring it up where you can see it. What I did here was, make sure, okay, it's almost all completely set in epoxy at this point. So you can see right there's the antenna connector sticking up and going through the wing. And what I did to do that, there's two nuts on those video transmitters. And what I did is I just spun one down, put my antenna I want to use on it, which is a Pagoda, Hobby King, whatever. Then I spun the nut back up till it touched, and then I backed it off like 2 turns, so there's a little distance between the nut and the connector, so this will tighten down completely right here. And so that left a little space in there. Then I took the antenna off and slipped it through the hole that I made in the wing with a bamboo skewer, and I pulled it down. Just illustrated out here. I made a little hole in it the size of this. Then I put the nut near the top and marked around it with an X-Acto knife and made a little cut and made that down in the wing about this deep. Then I got me, you're going to love this one, made up my epoxy. I'm a diabetic. So after I made up the epoxy, I took one of my insulin needles and cut the end off of it, so I just have a plunger thing with a pretty big hole in it. And I pulled that first nut on the bottom down about this far inside, and then I used the syringe to squirt epoxy around it, and just kept easing it down, make sure there's enough epoxy in it. It was about right here, and between the two nuts was filled with epoxy. Oops. I felt like I was done. And so that's what you've got right there right now. You've got two nuts on that. One of them backed off so it doesn't affect the antenna tightening down completely. And then the hole is filled with epoxy. Now that was that, what I'm going to call 60-second epoxy. That stuff that dries real fast. Oh, well, I can already see it's cured, I'm sorry. And so there's what is going to be my 5.8 video transmitter out on the wing. Now, the problem, and this is the reason I wanted to mount this video transmitter on the wing. I don't really need to see this display. I have smart audio. There's a heat sink on this side and a heat sink on this side. This heat sink covers all of the components. This one covers the major component that produces heat. So, seeing I don't need to get to this button with smart audio, and I don't need to see this display with smart audio, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to come on, my plan has been, I'm going to come on the inside, hook up my antenna, and then I'm going to see where right here I'm going to mount that. Yeah, that'll never work. And I'm not too thrilled with that either. Yeah, so I'm just going to mount it right here. But what my plan is to have this big heat sink out in the wind. So I'm not quite sure exactly how I'm going to mount it yet. I've been thinking about going through the wing. Whoops. Going through the wing with 4 holes. And somehow up here, putting 4 screws in. It's just this foam is not going to work. I'm still going to have to work on that to figure out what I'm going to do with that. But that's this wing may be finished tonight, I hope. Next step, these are standoffs, little plastic standoffs. They are M3, I think. They have little nuts for them. They're for some of my quads, verticals, and stuff. Not much to them. So what I'm doing is I've been putting these standoffs in the holes on the video controller. Oops. Need a couple of more hands. Humans just weren't made exactly right. If we had 4 hands, we'd be wanting 5 or 6. Okay. So now then, what I have is my video transmitter on 4 little standoffs. And you can see here's 4 little holes in the foam. They're not dug out yet. 4 little holes in the foam that match up with that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to dig out those 4 holes. God, some of this stuff you just can't get into. I'm going to have to do something. Quit using my cell phone. And what I'm going to do with those is, like I say, when I dig the holes down as far as you can see, the gap between the heat sink and the foam, then I'm going to epoxy those 4 standoffs in right there. I maybe use taller standoffs and just not completely put that foam on that heat sink on that foam. And then there's my connector. My wires will go from here to here in this channel and then out, and then I'll be able to put this wing fully together. Okay, before I put the 4th standoff on it and start digging out foam, I wanted to show you what I did. I put the longer standoffs on it. Oops, I may have to move where my holes are. No, I'll just disconnect the antenna and then it'll reconnect after the fact. Okay, so you can see this was the standoffs I was going to use. I actually put a little extension on them. So you can see, let me get that connector off of there. Okay, I'm going to turn this around where we can see it better. Maybe someday I'll invest in some video equipment. So there's my holes. And the one standoff that's not quite tall enough yet, you can see. So you could see how far I'm going to, let me turn this around. You could see how far down inside that wing I'm going to cut holes for the standoffs and then epoxy and then slide it in. Let's go out here and make sure I'm not going to be going all the way through the wing. Ah, boy. To here, and then it'll be about up. Yep, it's not going to go all the way through the wing. There's with the standoff up in the air, the heat sink up in the air, just a little bit on it. So let's do that. Boy, I change stuff constantly. So Got all 4 of my standoffs on right now, but I'd made another change because I'm going to leave about a 1/4 inch gap between the foam and the heat sink. I decided, well, I don't have to give up viewing my display and being able to get to my button, because it's going to completely be hanging out in the air on 4 standoffs. And now I'll bury the standoffs down to right in here. And this heat sink will be in the wind because it won't be touching the foam, and this heat sink will be in the wind. I think it's the best of everything I can do. Oops, bumped the tripod. And that way I can see, oops, no. See, there's supposed to be LEDs on this that should, no. Okay. So let's do it that way. And to tell you the truth, whoops, I'm going to take my little extension that I put on these, some little bitty standoffs on the bottom of the big standoffs. I'm going to take them off because the heat sink on the full heat sink on one side isn't as thick as the other. So I don't need to go inside the wing as much as I plan to, because you can see from the, oops, you can see from the board up is more distance here than from the board to the top of this heat sink. So there, now then, we'll put that in right there. And you see, I'm going to bury it, the standoffs, about a 1/2 inch in that wing, and then epoxy them. I like epoxy. So there it is, hole drills, dry fitted. That's about what I'm going to have from the foam to that bottom heat sink. And as you can see, again, that's going to give me, whoops, ow. That's not a video transmitter, it's a servo. That's going to let me get to my button, and I'll be able to see the LED. And I'll have wind flow through both heat sinks. I think that's the best thing I can do. Now, if we hold right here and mark with our fingernails and don't move them, you can see I've got more than half of that standoff down inside that foam. Let's put some epoxy around it and see if it really works. Okay. Right there's what I ended up with. That is epoxied. In my true style, I think I have one side that I didn't dig down as deep as I should. Maybe it'll set up if I keep holding it down. So I'm going to have that little air gap underneath on all sides. Whoops. All sides. I kind of did this on the fly, figuring it out as I go. I don't see why that should be any kind of a problem. May find out later that it is. There we go. Now the MMCX connector is in there. Goes over, the coax goes over to the hole in the wing to the output. This is completely hardened now. Just that epoxy's good stuff. Now then, let's finally do that cable. Well, the epoxy is cured. That's what I ended up with. Looks good from my house. So I did. The reason I wanted to mount this on the wing is because heat sinks on both sides. I just didn't trust it anywhere in the fuselage not to overheat. And today's when I came up with this, mounting it on standoff so it's out in the airstream. Now I did it on the bottom because if you know how wings work, Bernoulli effect, etc. Interruptions in the underside of the wing aren't as bad as interruptions on the top side of the wing where the lift is generated. So that was my whole thinking. I could be flawed on all of that. There's my connector for my wires. I like it. I don't know what else to say about it except for that works for me. I think it'll work. I know it works for me. Video transmitter, coax, antenna. I think that's the best I could do at this time. Make up that video cable so I can hook it to the flight controller. That's just about all. Look, he finally made up that video cable. On this end we have signal, voltage, ground, and then the smart audio for UART8. On this end we have the connector that came with the video transmitter. There it is. Finally. Cable is made. There's the controller. Goes over. I'll do that channel in the wing when we get through with this step. Then it goes over, and if you can see, it plugs in right down there. Yellow, red, black, white. Signal, voltage, ground, and then the white's the smart audio on UART8. Now for the important part. See if that video cable's worth a hoot. Turn on the platform. Hey, look at that. Must have ground and power, correct? So now let's epoxy up that wing, then we'll hook up the camera and test the whole thing. There it is, epoxied up, waiting on the epoxy to cure. It's almost cured. That stuff is fast. Now I worry I made a mistake on this. I got some epoxy on the inside rod down in this area, and it's going to make it so thick it doesn't want to slip over the other one, but we'll see how that works out. So let this epoxy cure, and like I say, that's it. Well, that's it after you put the video antenna on. Okay, gonna have to let this cure for a while so I can tell if this rod got epoxy on the outside enough where it won't slip inside the other one. I may have to cut this open and fix that. I didn't think about that at the time. Yes, my fears were realized. I went ahead and stuck this. This is the rod that goes through the fuselage, and then the others are down in here. I stuck this one in and pushed it in this direction as far as I could, and it came up 1 inch and 3/8 inches short. It didn't get to the collar. It's locked down in there now, epoxied. So I have another modification to the wing, mini Talon. It only has one side of the wing that is removable. So after the epoxy's cured now, this is never going to move. So I put it through the fuselage and measured how much it was sticking out on the other side of the fuselage too far to get this part in the collar. And it was sticking out exactly that much, 1 3/8 inches. So I had to cut 1 3/8 inches off of this side so that I made up for the 1 3/8 inches that this didn't go down inside there like it should. And that'll give me my 5 inches on the other side with this off of it. And the left wing will go on normally. The right wing, it's removable. It's just this whole part has to be moved through the fuselage, and this can't be epoxied into the fuselage. So that's the brakes. Left wing like that. I even left this part of the foam not completely epoxied down. So this rod will work perfectly. So the other one will slip all the way through, and then this one will slip on the other side, and they're still removable. I had to remove that much video cable from the way I cut it yesterday after I got in the video transmitter today and measured everything. So that's how much extra length I gave myself yesterday, and it worked out great. There it is. I do have one slight problem. You see that crack right down through there on that wing? That's how much too short I cut off the end of that rod. That's a blade's length width on a saw, so that's an easy fix. I did plug in the camera where it's supposed to be, but I did not put in the pan and tilt because I'm going to have to put just a small extension cable on that. For the finish of it, I'm going to set that camera right there, looking across the bench. There's the transmitter. Now then, the only thing I know of that is left to do on this is to repair the airspeed sensor tubing that comes Sunday. Today's Friday. And the little V-tail support that I want to put on the back. And I have to find a carbon fiber rod or wooden something to do that with. But other than that, this bad boy is finished. Physical build. Now let's look over here real quick. I'm going to turn it on, and then we're going to look over here real quick at the video receiver. So I've got this little power switch that I use right here when I'm troubleshooting. I can just flip. Now let's go over and look at the computer. So as you can see on the computer, it came right up. Yeah, there we go. There's our OSD. It's going through all sorts of things. That looks great to me. I mean, the numbers are not right in that at all. This flight controller hasn't been configured. I'm going to reflash it from the get-go as if it just came out of the box as my next steps. So that's the physical build, except for repairing the airspeed tubing and putting a brace on the V-tail. I'm going to call this thing finished. Thank you all so much.